Okay, when you good morning.
Okay.
Viewers. When the 4 bills that were awaiting presidential assent, of course now you have the Mining and Minerals Act, the KCCA, the Fiscal Plans Act, and then the Computer Misuse. I think the fiscal, or Uganda had already been declared a fiscal planning area, but the entire area of Uganda, doesn't matter which tenure of land you have, it was already gazetted as a fiscal planning area. So this new fiscal planning act, I think, aims at mainstreaming certain things about even zoning, what you can do in certain areas, what you cannot do in certain areas. Now the KCCA Act, of course, for long other issues. One, the controversy between the Lord Mayor, the executive director, and then what the technocrats can do. And then it's an authority, does it have autonomy? At some point in that law, they said that the old law, that the KCCA can issue municipal bonds. I think, is it not more than 10% of its collected revenue, something of that sort. I think the law also kind of streamlined that bit of it. And I think on the, which other law do we have?
There's the Mining and Minerals Act.
Yeah, now the Mining and Minerals Act, of course now that, already in Uganda we have the public trust doctrine. In other words, whatever minerals you find on your land don't even belong to you legally. They are held on our behalf by the state. So this law, one provision I saw that could be very salient and the viewer should know is once they find minerals on your land, I think they will just compensate you for the land, not for the minerals.
Because the minerals now belong to the state.
They have always belonged to the state. Only this time around,
they
make it very clear. And then the licenses, because for a long time people have been complaining that the licensing procedures have not been clear. Who get now, like in Movement, people are mining the gold. Then people are mining rare earth, because they discovered some rare earth minerals in, I think, Western Uganda. So now the licensing procedures also have been streamlined further. And when it comes to, for instance, if you want to get maybe a rare earth mining license, the Ministry of Energy, you know where to go, the permanent secretary's roles will be clear. But overall, if you find minerals on your land, they have never been yours. But the best thing about this amendment is that it clears the air, that we shall compensate you for the land and the market value of the land, not for the minerals.
Okay. Now let's head into this particular controversial. This has been called a controversial one because it is targeting critical voices online. That is the controversial Computer Misuse Amendment Bill, which now is law in the country, and it's going to be targeting anyone who is releasing content, whether audio, visual, without the consent of the person in that particular content that is being produced. How about this particular law? Is it the right law, or is it limiting certain voices?
For starters, the Computer Misuse Act, I think, was introduced by Honorable Nsireko. This is interesting.
MP Kampala Central.
Yeah. And it has been fast-tracked in quite a fashion. This is my criticism of that law. You see, the Data Protection Act was passed in 2019. Now, when this law is introduced as an aspect of sharing people's consent with people's data, people's information without their consent, you get the feeling that they're replicating already what is elsewhere. Because for starters, the law is vague. It has a lot of vague provisions. For instance, you can be incarcerated over sharing of unsolicited information.
Okay.
Now, what amounts to unsolicited information? Oh yes, we understand that very many people have been using the social media space to taint people's image, to even destroy people's businesses. Now, for instance, someone will wake up in the morning and create a run on the bank and say that bank ABCD is undercapitalized. Then before you know it, the entire financial sector is in panic. So you could argue that by limiting the people's, because the right to freedom of expression is not absolute, it can be subject to limitations.
Okay.
But then if you're going to replicate what is already in the law, another law, without even doing it properly and with vague provisions, then you're going to create a bigger problem. What I would have suggested is government would have given more human resource or even strengthen the Data Privacy and Protection Act. Though this law introduces very many penal provisions, like if you are found promoting hate speech, you'll be liable for certain prison sentence and money, and then you will be stopped from contesting for a position for 10 years. So that's the overview of the law. Yes, it gags. I think it's because of its vague provisions. It's going to limit freedom of expression, maybe unfairly, and maybe fairly. Okay. But that is my criticism of the law.
All right. Now, we look at the penalties here. Most of the Ugandans are more concerned about these penalties that the government has put on board, that you may be sentenced to 15 years in prison, rather to 7 years in prison, or pay a fine of 15 million Ugandan shillings. Or there's also a provision that you can face the both. You pay 15 million and then also get imprisoned for 7 years or more. I need first of all get to understand, does this seem too fair enough? Does one's public expression of their own opinion, whether via social media or television, make them 10 years, regardless of what kind of information they've portrayed out?
You see, the duty to pass any sentence according to our law is with the courts. So when the courts are arbitrating a certain, or even arriving at a certain judgment or sentence, in this particular, now this is a penal law, they have to weigh certain factors. They may either, if they deem it fit, to sentence you to both concurrently, the 15-year sentence, 15 million and then the 7 years, or one of the two. So it's at the discretion of the judge. But I don't think this law, you see, very many, we have had very many people have been charged over offensive communication that's an offense in the Computer Misuse Act, like Stellanians. One thing the law should have streamlined is section 25 and 24, which talks about offensive communication. Because now when Stellanians was brought before the courts and she was charged with offensive communication, the reason why the charge did not succeed is they failed to prove that it was indeed Stellanians who was behind the buttons typing the offensive communications. Okay. So I felt that the law would have streamlined that a bit. So, because already even the charges that are succeeding in court, it's one thing for the police to charge, draft a term sheet and put a sentence, and not a sentence, draft a term sheet, put a charge. And it's another thing for that same charge, if it's taken before court, to succeed. Okay. So it's highly likely that if the investigations are not done well and maybe the ingredients of the offense of the offensive communication are not met, you might find that many people might be held up for years in prisons and then their charges don't even succeed. In other words, they're exonerated. Okay,
the Honorable Nsereko says that we need to be more responsible in the way we use these platforms, that the law is now there to work on people who are not responsible. Now, when he mentions responsibility of what you post, what you share on social media, this has posed questions. Are we supposed to ask permission if, in case, you find out there's some wrongdoing taking place and you have to capture the event? Does it mean we have to ask for consent from that particular person in the act who is already a victim to allow us to report him to the courts of law or to the authorities?
Again, and you're right, you're pointing out a very big contradiction. Sharing, now, for instance, if I get your picture and maybe the police asks for, maybe, let me assume that so there's a criminal and we want information about him, and maybe someone shares that. And this doesn't only deal with public social media, it also deals with end-to-end social media. For instance, if I get your picture and I share it with a lady without your consent,
without my consent,
then you are warranted to go and say, no, you shouldn't. But you see, the problem is, again, I'm going to go back to the same issue.
Okay.
Those issues are better managed by the Personal Data Protection Office at NITA, which law was passed in 2019. They made the regulations in 2021 last year, and it is a better law to handle personal information that is shared illegally. Because for them, for the data protection law, it has rights for the data controller, who is the person, the company, or the person who gets that information and collects information, and then the data subject, who is the person whose information is maybe being collected. Before we even go to amend the law, we would have strengthened and given the Personal Data Protection Office a bigger budget to implement that law, and even maybe even do capacity building for the police. And because many people you will find whose sex tapes, sorry to say, have been leaked by their rogue girlfriends or boyfriends, end up going to the police, and then the police ends up even referring them to NITA, to the Personal Protection Office. So
to work upon them.
Yeah, and because the people are better equipped to handle this. So I felt that they would have dealt with the, maybe if Honorable Sir wanted to strengthen the aspects of sharing personal information illicitly, he would have gone to the Data Protection Act and put those aspects there. I don't see anything that any gaps that the law covered apart from making sentences excessive.
Okay.
Apart from introducing more draconian punishments for people who are sharing unsolicited information. Up to now, we won't even know what amounts to unsolicited information. We won't know. Like I said, the law is vague. It has very many vague terms. It's shrouded in a lot of vague language.
Okay.
So it is a law that can you can easily fall prey to the law because of it. Someone can easily use a certain provision in that law, the vague provisions, as an excuse.
Okay. Some people are clearly saying that maybe the law has come in to at least safeguard those in authority, mainly the policymakers, MPs, who do not want to be criticized by the public people, maybe people who are actually using social media. Look at people who are on television, radio, and then others in print and all that. Will that be, can that as well be justified?
You could argue, because if you look at these laws and the prosecutions that have been brought under this law, you could argue maybe they have a political inclination.
Okay.
But I think they are again missing the point, and this is the argument I have been trying to make to people who are in support of this bill. You see, what other jurisdictions are doing, the EU, maybe some Asian countries, South American, even the Americans, is they are going after the big tech, the people who own these tech platforms, not the low-hanging fruits of people using them. Because, let me give you an example. Social engineering has become a very big problem on social media. These big tech companies can, because of the information they collect about us and the way they monitor our behavior, they can use the information that they collect to social engineer. Social engineering means, and let me give you an example. Someone follows your ways of life, understands them, and then gives you a call and pretends to know you, and then even asks for your PIN, you give it away, and then the next thing you know, you're hacking. Because again, this law goes into those aspects of hacking a bit. But again, even the hacking elements, those were already there. For instance, if you go after Facebook, if at all we could use our working mechanisms within the East African community to convince Kenya, Tanzania, Rwanda that, you know what, let's come together and have a bigger bargaining power again and get uniform laws against this big tech to prevent things like social engineering. Because look, they store all our personal information in servers in San Francisco or Texas. And if you want to safeguard a country, the best thing to do is pass laws that go after. Now we need a law. Now, one other thing that this Computer Misuse Act misses out, which it attempts to do, but which would have deemed much better, is content moderation. They would have demanded for these online platforms, these big tech, to have content moderators, that any content coming out of Uganda that is abusive in nature should not be allowed. That is a more sustainable fashion. Because now, what is going to happen is you're going to see people hiding their identity and spewing out all this sort of vitriol and wrong information that the law is barring for these people to share. So the best thing that we would have done moving forward is going after the big tech, looking at content moderation, looking at safeguarding this nation state's sovereignty. Look, in 2016, Cambridge Analytica harvested thousands of information that was stored on Facebook and used that information to help the Russians rig an election, not rig an election, but influence an outcome of an election. Now, these in Kenya, during the Kenyatta election, the Kenyatta camp hired Cambridge Analytica to do the same thing, social engineering. How, you see, if I collect information about you and monitor you online, I can know what to tell you. That's why you see, again, these big tech companies sell most of our information to third parties without our consent. Now, those issues, by the way, are dealt with in the Personal Data Protection Act.
Okay.
Now, when you attempt to mix them up in a penal law of a Computer Misuse Act a bit, and you do not even go into the depth of the issues, you risk having a law that is badly enforced or unenforceable.
Okay.
So the best thing that would have been done is look at these areas, look at it, and then don't mix up principles. If sharing of children and pornographic information is, that can already be catered for in another law. If you want to strengthen that other law, you would have gone to that other law. You do not create confusion and then you cross-reference Data Protection Act in the Computer Misuse Act. So and besides, there are more things to be looked into in the Computer Misuse Act now, like streamlining section 24 and 25 that talks about offensive communication, which I felt wasn't done adequately.
Okay.
So basically, that's it.
All right, and more of this discussion is coming up after the break. Just to remind you that the punishment for the convicted person is 15 million Ugandan shillings or a 7-year jail term, if not both. That is, if at all you're sharing content using different platforms, using either Twitter, Instagram, or you can even look at television, radio, information that has no defense, or information with hate speech, unsolicited, and sharing information about children without the consent of their parents, and many more. So when you look at some of those details, these are some of the punitive measures that the government is trying to look through to at least control information flow and information dissemination in the country. We are looking at more of the laws that were actually put into more of the bills that were put in 2 laws by the president yesterday, and of which there is the Computer Misuse Amendment Bill 2022, which is now law, and that means anything you share should be very, very articulate without any wrong information, or it should not as well incite any violence. We return with more discussions here on Smart Means Business. Keep on.